Hello guys, I am Tor Riveroth, work with PDM tech support within SolidWorks, and today I thought we were going to talk a bit about enterprise PDM archives. Now it's going to be a fairly compact session, a lot of boring technical stuff, so so hold on to your hats. How many in here have EPDM or are experienced with EPDM? Great. So why are you here, I wonder? You should know all this stuff. Let's see, how can I move forward and backwards? Do you know if there's a clicking thingy? I don't know. I don't know the technical term for it. Clicky thingy. I guess I'll have to click over here. Exactly. Okay, so I thought today we were going to talk about archives. It's just going to be archives. So I'm going to explain what they are, especially how they work inside the database. I mean, why we call them with those weird names, and how it works inside the database. And these things are actually really good if you're very familiar with them, because when you troubleshoot a file problem in EPDM, it's usually the archive server that's the issue behind it. How to find the archives, what's inside an archive, all the weird files. That magic index.xml file, which is actually a pretty important file in an archive. UID, there is a unique version identifier, wrong direction. What happens when we actually retrieve files from the server, how the database and the client works together. Troubleshooting, a lot of various errors and what they potentially could mean. Managing, what to do to keep it tidy. Some tools, a bit of replication, because replication is basically copying archives from one machine to another. What happens behind the scenes there, troubleshooting errors from them, and that's it. So a lot of stuff. We'll start now. I want a clicky thingy. What are archives? Okay, so basic overview. What is an archive? In EPDM, you create a file vault. The file vault is part database, part archives. So archives are where we store the physical files. All the version information is stored in the archives. So it's your file share, file store, so to speak. The database just contains information and pointers to the archives. And that's what we're going to dig into, look at these pointers, see how they work together. When you create one file vault, you get one archive that belongs to that file vault. We can copy those archives or replicate those archives to multiple servers to kind of spread the data load a bit. We still are left with one database. When you have just a database, you can see the files and stuff that's in the vault, but you can't actually check out, check in, do anything, because those physical files need the archive. And there is a special component, the archive service, that's hosting the actual reading and writing of files to the vault archive. So how do archives and database work together? So what's happening behind the scenes here? So the first thing, of every file that you add to EPDM will get a unique document ID. So the first thing that happens in the database when we add a file, like that part file or something, it gets a unique ID. Clean vault, nothing in it, the first file gets 2. And that number is just a running number. We call it a document ID. And that follows the file through its history. So all the check-in, check-outs belong to that document ID. In parallel, when the document ID is assigned in the database, it now can create an archive on the archive server. And the archive will basically be the document ID name. So that file has 2, and the archive folder is 2. And within the archive folder, we have all the good stuff. Now, we don't really store them with a file name, cylinder, or anything. So we store them in a hexadecimal form. And this is where the problem comes in. So in the database, you have an ID of a decimal value, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And in the archive, that ID is converted to a hexadecimal form. So I'm showing here, the document ID 1375 in the decimal form is actually 55F in a hexadecimal form. They're one and the same. You just have to use the, handy-dandy calculator to figure out which one is which. Now, why do we store them as that? Well, it's so that we can spread out the archives. It's ideally not good to put all the files or all the folders in one huge parent folder, right? So hexadecimal is handy because it actually loops first from 0 to 9, and then it goes A to F, and then it starts over on 0. So we can loop over these 16 folders, as we can see there. So archive that ends with, and the folder structure is all the archives that end with a 1 end up in the 1 folder. All the archives that end with an E end up in the E folder, and so forth. So you can't really find a file based on its file name in the archive server. You actually have to rely on the database to figure out this file has this ID in this folder. And as I say, why is it hexadecimal? Well, we spread them out a little bit, so it's easy for the disk to read from different locations. You can actually spread it out. If that archive location is running out of space, you can actually take a few of these, move them to a second drive. You can, theoretically have one drive per main archive folder, so it gives you a lot of configurable options. Exactly, several disks. And another thing is, since we don't really store any file structures or anything, when we rename a file, it's only happening in the database. When you move a file from one folder to another, it's just updating an ID in the database. It's not actually needing to go out onto the file store and move them around or something. So that can be really handy. So how do we find it? Well, we need to know the document ID and convert it to an archive ID. The easiest way is, of course, the times you would go in here and do something is usually when you're troubleshooting something or perhaps managing something, moving it from one drive to another. It's good to know where the archives are and how to find them. Or if you're troubleshooting a particular problem, a particular file, you need to figure out what archive ID does this file have. Now, the SQL server is pretty handy because it has all those IDs, and there is a quick way to just find out which ID does a particular file have. You type in that command, select asterisk from document where file name is a file name. That's going to spit back the document ID. You bring up your calculator, type in 43413, and press the hex button in the scientific calculator. If you have, you're not certain of the file name, or part of the file name, use a % sign when you write that query. % is used all over EPDM, but in SQL world it means wildcard. And actually, if you type in all this stuff, it converts the archive for you. So this document will be available for download somewhere, and you can copy stuff. But it's pretty handy. Convert binary will actually convert it to the hexadecimal value. Great. So where are they physically stored then on this archive server? Well, if you don't make any changes, we're going to put them in the Enterprise PDM data folder or Enterprise PDM install folder, create a subfolder called data. That's where it's going to create a folder with the same name of the vault. So in the upper right corner there's a data folder. The file vault is called Enterprise PDM Vault. There's a second vault with EPDM 2012 Vault. Right? When you install the archive server, that's where you specify where should the archives go. So normally you have a separate drive. You might not want to put it on your C drive in a production environment. You put it on a D drive or something. Don't put it straight in the root, even though it says root folder. Use a sub directory. And that way you can at least, it's not going to fill up your C drive with a bunch of, or your D drive with a bunch of 16 folders. And you should put it in a subfolder. So it's defined when you install the archive server. And any new file vault you create will by default end up in that location. If you're not sure where that vault is, the registry is the best place to check So you open up Registry Editor, and you go to the Enterprise PDM key. All the enterprise stuff is under SolidWorks Applications, PDMWorks Enterprise, and all the archive server specifics is under a separate archive server key. So if you go down to that thing, there is a default location. That's where they end up. And you could potentially have the archive spread out over different drives, those 0 to F folders. So if you go into a sub key called archive table, each of those 0 to F will have its own path. These are very important when you are moving stuff between one drive to another. And that often happens, or you go there, you buy a new drive, you think you've moved it, you forgot to update one of those paths, and all of a sudden you can't open any, or you can open part of the files or something. So this registry location is basically pointing where each of these hexadecimal folders are. Now inside an archive, so we know where the archives are, we know each file gets its unique archive. So that file, for example, is now in an archive folder called 23B. That file has 3 versions, right? So in the UI, you will see version 3 of 3. You can only view one version at a time. On the archive server side, each version gets a unique identifier. Version 1 is 1, 2 is 2, and 3 is 3. Keep in mind that those version numbers are also hexadecimal, right? So when you reach 10, it's actually going to be A. 11 is going to be B. So you have to think of that when you want to grab a particular version. So on the archive server side, that's how it's stored. On the client side, for the users, that's how it looked. And the file name, as we can see, we don't actually store the file name in the archive. It's just a bunch of numbers. And here's another thing. The archive will only store files that are unique. So you may not have, if a file has 3 versions, it may or may not have 3 physical versions. It all depends on the content of the file. So we only write to the archive folder when we actually want, when there is a physical change to it. Now there could be other files in an archive folder. These are the most common files, right? So this is a very common folder. We have the ones that end with a number. That's the version number. So we can see there's 6 versions there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There are some files that ends with GC. That means this archive has been, compression has been enabled. And compression is a good way of reducing space. It basically zips or gzips all the older versions except the topmost version. And that would reduce a bunch of space, as we can see there. Instead of storing 196K, it stores 107K or something. There is always an index.xml file. That one is real important. It needs to be there. It's for the archive server to figure out which version to send to the client. And then there may be a bunch of these thumb images. And that's when you are viewing large icon mode or thumbnail mode. We actually store a tiny little thumbnail so we can view it without having to cache the file, without having to retrieve the file. This index.xml file then. So we're going to go through exactly what's inside it and how it works. So the index.xml file will be 1 per file archive. And it's always going to be called index.xml. And inside it, if you open it in Internet Explorer or something, it's going to indent the stuff. And that's how a normal index file looks. If the index file is gone or missing, you're going to get errors retrieving the files. We're going to look at that a little better. And inside an index file, don't expect every single file to contain all the entries, because some stuff is written depending on what happens to the archive. For example, the compression stuff will only exist if the file, if that version is compressed. The archived stuff will only exist if it's archived. So let's look at each of those entries. So the first thing is the index version, 9.0. That's really just a thing for EPDM to figure out if we made any major changes to the archive structure. And the last time we actually did an archive structure change was back in 2008, which few people actually are running nowadays. So most of the index file will have 9.0. That's not going to match your actual EPDM version. It's going to be an archive version. So you're probably going to see 9.0 there. Then we have the file name. Now, the file name is stored there, but we only store, why do we store it there? We store it there was a good reason for it, but the problem is that if you rename the file later on, the original name will still be in the index file. So don't trust the name in the index file. So it's probably going to be new part.sldprt until you rename it. But it's written there when the index is created. Right? And it's normal that it doesn't rename. Version, okay, so each version in that archive will have a version identifier. An index file, one version must at least have one version ID. So we can say ID 1, ID 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it tells the archive server which version to pick out of those. So 1 would be 00001, 2 would be 00002, and so forth. And the version inside here is decimal, not hexadecimal. So another gotcha there. UID, that's a unique version identifier. Each version that you add, every time you check in a file, even if it's a file with the same name or something, it's still going to have an individual unique identifier for each version. So the first version of the first file gets 1, the first version of the second file gets 2, the third version or the second version of the first file gets 3, and so forth. This is really not something that you would often see. It's used by the archive server to quickly figure out which version it is. When the client requests a version, it feeds it with a UID, so the archive server can just grab it without having to go and double check with the server. Speeds up retrieval of files a bit. The date is fairly relevant as well. It's an internal thing. It's used to match up thumbnails with the weird thumb image. That name there is actually just a date in a weird scrambled format. So then it knows that version has that thumbnail. Status archived. If you're using cold storage to delete or move files out from the archive, when you open the index file, you're going to see that version says archived. So that's an indication that this file is either deleted or moved to some kind of off storage location. And the compression. If you have enabled compression, we'll talk about it a little later, you're going to see an entry for each version that has compressed. So it's, again, one of those things that the archive server use. So the main thing you want in the index file is the version. Now here comes the fun part. There is also a referenced version, right? So sometimes when there is no real physical change of the file, you check out the file, you do something on the data card that's not affecting the file. And when that file is checked in, if the physical content of the file or the binary content is the same, we just create a pointer to the previous file instead of the physical file. So when you actually see this file should have 4 versions and you only see 2 in the archive, it's likely that it's a referenced version. Double-click the index file and figure out why. So here's an example. We add and check in a text file. The first version gets a version entry there, and it also gets a 001 physical file. That's version 1 of the file. Now, you check it out, you make a little change in the data card, you check it in. So that creates another version. EPDM creates versions for every change you do to a file. But in this case, it didn't actually write something to the physical file. So when it gets stored on the archive server, it actually just creates a reference pointer. So version 2 points to 1. So whenever version 2 is retrieved, it's actually going to send you the content of version 1, which is what I say here. There you go. And then you check out the file. You actually open it and do some physical change in it and check it in. That's going to create the version 3. So here we have a file with 3 versions. However, version 2 is the same as version 1. So it's going to grab version 1. It's a reference pointer. And it does save some space because we're not storing every individual version. But it can be a little confusing. Oh, here's the UID. I guess we can go over it again. So every file has a unique version identifier, mainly used by the archive server to not have to grab or do extra calls to the SQL server. Replication, when you set up a replicated environment, when the archive servers have to talk to one another, it really helps them to figure out what's going on. And you see that sometimes there is a UID, sometimes there's not. So don't freak out if you don't see a UID. The only times you actually have a problem with the UID would be if it's garbage, if it's some kind of text value instead of a number for some weird reason. But rarely will you have an issue with the UID. Okay, so what happens when a yeah, sure, go ahead.
What are certain circumstances in which you might even look at that XML file? Generally, when you set problems?
I would say this is mainly when you have a problem. Someone is getting a file, it's not coming down to the client, right? They start screaming, where's my file? And you say, I don't know, let's go check the archive. You know, that's where it is. I mean, normally, files shouldn't go missing, files should be happy, everything should be perfect, so you never will see that.
That probably generally only happens when you replace the drive or go to a mobile.
As an example, or it could be a bad drive and all of a sudden it starts grabbing, or someone has, you know, replaced or moved the server and forgot to update some registry pointer or not follow the instruction is usually where problems end up, you know. Go ahead.
If I check out a SolidWorks file and I change the data card,
Yeah.
in our circumstance, the data card is linked with the file property, custom file property.
Yep.
If I make a change to that data card, does that make a change to
Yeah.
the file and thus adds a phone number?
Correct. If you have custom property mappings to a file, which for SolidWorks files you often have description, number, whatever, when you type something in a card and you click save, we open that file with Document Manager, which is the SolidWorks API, the interface to read and write SolidWorks files, write in that value, and then physically update the file. So the binary content will be slightly different. Even though it kind of seems like I'm just changing a text, it's actually saving that text into the file so you can see it in the title block or whatever you do inside the thing. Go ahead.
I have two kind of workflows. I have added a file name, something like one, in the first workflow, and I have deleted it. And the SQL data remains the row for that file.
For the file.
And which says the column name deleted as false.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
And I add a same file name, the one, different workflow. And what it says, like the deleted column will be false. The previous was true. And this time it cannot be added into the system because the uniqueness was not satisfied.
You've run into a problem where it should be deleted, but it's not.
Yeah.
Yeah. Contact tech support. That is a known issue. We've seen that a few times. And since we're so many good people here and everyone knows anything, if you can figure out a good workflow, a good step-by-step instruction, how to get a file, when you delete it, it becomes deleted. It disappears from the view. You find it in deleted items. But for some reason, it still triggers that unique file name check. And when you start digging into the backbone here, you see exactly that. It should be marked as deleted, because that's really what we do. If you just delete it and not shift delete it, not destroy it, we just switch the flag, don't display it. And that flag, for some weird reason, remains 0, i.e. it's still not deleted. However, fortunately, there are some other places in the database where that delete flag is set. So the file is actually deleted. It can't be found. You can't search it. However, things that talk to the SQL directly, like the unique check, checks that flag. List me all the files that have the duplicate file name, but exclude the ones that are deleted. Deleted files shouldn't trigger it.
Yeah, I do not have this issue when I add the same file and the same.
Maybe that's the steps. Try to figure out if you can repeat it from a new file or from a clean file, and let us know so we can fix that darn thing. We have a script that can detect them and fix them for you. So if you're struggling with this thing, contact your reseller or tech support, and we'll help you out there. Nope. That must be something completely different. File should never go local. Well, it sounds like they end up in a state where the user doesn't have read permission. Perhaps the state is that little hand earlier that ignore permissions in previous states. Some people enable that flag. It's a dangerous flag because it means that use the permissions from this state rather than the older states. Because everything in EPDM is historical. So if you're going to delete something, you need to have delete permission in the state and all the previous states, anywhere it's been, right? But if you turn on that ignore permissions, then you are allowed to delete it, even though you couldn't delete it further down or in some other state. So that one can cause some problems sometimes, especially if you remove the read flag for a group or user. All of a sudden, a file disappears, and you just see the cached copy rather than a file. But again, contact tech support, and we'll sort it out with you. So let's see here. What happens in the get operation? Okay, so a client on a machine picks a particular version. All right, version 2 of this file. There is no local version in the cache. The version tab shows a little X, minus of 3. I don't have anything cached. The archive server gets a call. You know, since we're on the client, it knows which document ID and all that stuff is. So it just tells the archive server, get me this document ID and that version. Right? The archive server checks the registry, figures out that the file should be in folder 8, F8, if that's visible there. Right? So it goes in there, it goes into that physical folder. Again, it's the archive server service, which is a server-side service. The client never goes directly to that folder. It's always the service that reads and writes the files. So it's all nice and secure. And this is basically what it does, right? It opens the index files. It figures out which file should it be. Well, in this case, it's version 2. So I'm going to send version 2 to the file. Had this been a referenced version, it would look there and say, it's a reference to version 1, and sent version 1 to the client. And of course, we don't want it to be called 001 on the client side. So when it ends up in the client, when we write it to the cache folder, we rename it with a proper name based on the database, the documents table, and then we also set the correct timestamps matching that version so that we now see that it matches up with the database. Version 2 in the cache, version 2 in the database. That's really all that's happening. You know, the archive server sends a physical file to the client, it writes it and gives it a name. Oh, are we already there? What time is it? No, I've got plenty of slides. I just want to make sure we're managing the time. Shoot, we don't have much time. Okay. Anyway, let's look at some archive server issues.
Or
Yes?
if a user already has a file cache, does that one get deleted?
Yes.
Then retrieved?
Correct. And if you have very, weird permissions on your C drive or some system admin has decided to lock down your C drive and told, Windows profiles can't do it, you could end up with problems. A common indication is you're checking out the file. It's supposed to take the file and remove the read-only attribute of the cached copy, and then you open it up and it's still read-only in SolidWorks, right? That's a good indication that it's not able to physically do something with that cached copy. Often it's because of the Windows access permission. So someone has restricted the folder permissions, not the inside the enterprise, but on the physical drive. So something to look for. Okay, so troubleshooting archive errors. I mean, if everything works fine, you'll never have to go to the archive server and do anything, and that's the ideal scenario, right? But it's good to know that, okay, we know it's got archive IDs, we know it's like that. So what is an indication that it's an archive error versus a more global database errors? Archive errors is usually when you have a trouble with the physical file. You can't open it, you can't get it, you can't check it out. Anything that needs the physical file, right? Or when you're trying to add files and you get some kind of can't add file, error opening archive, you often see a hexadecimal number in the error message. That indicates it's an archive issue, right? The archive server also handles the authentication part. So when you log into the Vault, the first thing that the archive server does is checks What type of login is it? Are you a valid user? Blah, blah, blah. So if the archive server is down or something, you're not going to be able to log in. Of course, anything with replication is usually an archive issue because the 2 machines or 3 machines or 15 machines can't talk to one another. If it's a database problem, well, that's more of a global issue. Those are usually individual per file. These are more for the whole vault, right? You can't go into a particular folder. It says there's no permission. That's a common error if it has trouble talking to the SQL server. So it's likely not an archive issue if you get these type of behaviors. That's a classic. If there's something that goes wrong with the SQL commands, you get that cannot find object in the database. Mm-hmm.
So basically to authenticate, you go to the archive server.
Mm-hmm.
Everything else goes straight to the SQL server.
Yeah. That's basically it. And of course, depending, most of you probably are using Windows login type, which means that on the archive server, we store a list of which Windows groups are allowed to be here, and then the actual Active Directory server handles the authentication. But it still starts in the archive server. That's the starting point. So what to look for? Well, logs. Logs are great, and a lot of people forget it. Even resellers and SolidWorks tech support guys. Start with the log. Okay, on the client log, when you have an error, or one of your users is reporting we're having open errors, you ask them, send me the log, right? So they can get to it from the admin tool. Even if they're not an admin, you just start the enterprise admin tool, view local log file. There it is. They can copy it and paste it onto the desktop. It pastes the whole log file, and you can open it on another EPDM machine, read through it. RCE errors are usually archive errors. That's on the client side. So logically, there is an error on the archive side. The client says something is wrong. The client part is good because you get the name, the ID, a timestamp. You figure out that's the version that's having a problem. Then you go deeper. You go to the archive server log. And the archive server log can either be found in the event viewer if you have access to the physical server. Now, you might not have access to the physical server, so you probably have access to the EPDM admin tool. And each archive server has a name, and you right-click on the name and select Show My Log. And that log can be copied also. Tech support will often ask, can you provide us with a log? If you have an issue that you need help with, collect those logs, because they are, the first port of entry, trying to figure out what's going on here. Some tips when you're dealing with archive errors, focus on one file. I know, we're checking out this assembly, get all these weird errors. Well, go down to one file. Is it a particular part file? Often it's like one version out of a bunch of versions. It may not be the assembly itself that has the problem. It could be one of the parts. So try to figure out that. A good way to check that the permissions are okay with your cache, provided the file is checked in, right-click the file or go up to the Tools menu, select Clear Local Cache on that file. Make sure it gets rid of the local copy and then do a right-click Get Latest. If it has trouble retrieving that latest version, you know that it's probably having some kind of issue with the archive server. So when you're dealing with references and stuff, uncheck that Get dialog or the Get box, and it will only get one file instead of 100 files. Go to another machine. Logically, if it's a problem with the archive, every client on that server will have the issue. So just test it there. The archive service might have a bad day or something. Restart it and see if it starts working. And then start investigating why is there a problem with this darn archive, right? Often archives are placed on some network location, like a NAS or SAN device or something like that. Permissions may have changed. The admin password might have gone out. An indication is it worked yesterday, it doesn't work today. Check if it's a share. That's a very common thing. And logs, again, the logs are actually the key to anything. So we're going to go through a few of the logs here. Very standard common errors. So here, a client checks out the file. It's not checked. He gets this error opening archive. Archive doesn't exist. First thing you do is open the client log. It's going to tell you the archive ID. So write down that. so you know which archive ID it is. RCE errors, I don't know, it's programming for file error. That's what it calls it, RCE. Comes from something. I knew it once upon a time, I don't know it anymore. Then go and look at the archive server log and find the same error. So, you know, match it on the ID or the timestamp or something. So this will tell you a lot of stuff. It tells you it's a get file problem. Okay, it's file not found, so it's having trouble retrieving that file. You can see that it's getting version 1. Inside the log, it's going to say revision 1, but it's actually version. Most of the stuff on that is versions. Revisions only exist in the database, really. It's going to tell you where it's trying to get that file from. So you can just figure out what's wrong with that path. And the first thing you do is, you know, is that the good path? Does it exist? So you try to browse to it on the server, of course. You can't do this from a client. The archives are. But in a troubleshooting scenario, you just need to figure out why can't I get it? So this is, you know, the physical folder is not there for some reason. Why was it? Well, someone had actually moved those folders from a C drive to a D drive, right? So they're no longer where they expect them to be, right? Forgot to update the registry. So any kind of file that was supposed to be on that C drive couldn't be retrieved. And what do? Well, double check the registry, make sure the folder path is valid, you know, figure out why it's not there. Same thing here. I'm saving a file from SolidWorks. I get the weird error, failed to add the file. Operation cancelled by user. I think that's just a side effect. But failed to add the file is the error. Again, start with a log, RC error, find the ID. What's the problem? Well, you see now it's an add file, so it's having trouble writing to the disk. Figure out, okay, there's the path again. I/O error usually means input-output error. Something is going wrong with the reading or writing of physical data. Same thing here. Check that it's a valid path. Can I create something in that path? No. Something is wrong. That path is not valid. Again, someone had moved the path here. E drive didn't exist. Nothing worked. So just another same error, but when adding a file. Fix it. That's what you do. Getting a particular version fails. That's the most common one, right? You try to get the version, it gets error opening archives. Now, it only happens to one version. So you log in as someone that can retrieve versions. You can retrieve the latest, but you can't retrieve version 2. You can retrieve version 1. So it's kind of isolated to one version. Start with the client log. You know, I'm just pushing this. The client log is the first place to go, see what's going on. Trace the file. You can see there it tells you revision. So it's trying to get version 2 of this file. It's trying to get it from the D drive. File not found. So it's having trouble reading that file for some reason. Go to that folder. Yep, folder's there. No problem. You know, I can go into it. So that shouldn't be an issue. But something is missing. There isn't a version 2. There should be a version 2. I'm opening the index file, and this is where you want to open the index file and take an extra look. Should version 2 be there or not? It should be there according to the index file. Something has eaten up my number 2. Antivirus ate it up. Right? Go to your backup, retrieve it back. There you go. So, here we go again. Access is denied. Someone is doing something and trying to get the file. Access is denied. Start with your client log. Is there an error? RCE access denied. Again, points you. The client log is basically just informing you of the ID. That's all it do. Archive server log is the one that contains the good stuff. Now here is something. You see that it's a UNC path, a server path, a share there. As soon as it's share, you need to suspect permissions, problems accessing that share. Something is up with it. So you get an administrator to go onto the server, check where's that share? Is it okay? Yeah, it's okay. but it is a UNC path. So, okay, the archive service is basically the thing that reads and writes stuff to these locations. Of course, that service needs to have access to read and write, and shares and stuff are usually very restricted. So often, the archive server will run under the system account, which is the machine itself, and the machine might not actually have access to the share. However, a normal domain user might have, or a domain admin might have access. So check that. Could just be that the system account is not given. IT has restricted access to that share a little extra.
Is that a pound thing to do?
To restrict, yeah. Well, most IT guys are crazy. So yeah. Actually, it's more and more common, right? I mean, you have SAN devices, NAS devices. When I say share, I don't mean necessarily a share over in China, right? I mean, it's anything that's network connected, not directly attached storage. We prefer it being directly on the server, but knowing how it's working behind the scenes, there's really no, restriction for it to be local. The reason we want it to be local is that the speediest way to read and write files. If it's on a slowpoke network drive somewhere, who knows? It might take forever to get that assembly because the archive server has to read it. Now, logically, don't put it on a share in another office. That makes no sense. Use replication in that case and set the server in that office. But it could happen. I'm just pointing out some, silly errors. In this case, the service didn't have access to share, so you have to fix it by maybe giving it access or talking to IT and get the share access better. Same thing here, error accessing a file on the new server, but this is only adding or checking in new files, new versions. I can retrieve files just fine, but I can't add anything to it. Client log shows you what's going on. Archive server log, again, IE error. I'm having trouble adding a file, a share, so it's a likely permission issue. Go and check the path. Yeah, it's good. The path is there. But for some reason, it can only read but not write. So the write access has been permitted. Someone was a little too stringent in their permissions. And fix it. Yeah, add the permissions. So hopefully this doesn't happen, but if it does happen, especially if it just happens overnight, go check with IT. Have they done something? If they usually have.
What if your hard drive full?
Well, yeah, that could be another thing. If it's full, that's something. But now you know exactly where to look and find them and identify. No, but I mean that's the thing. You might not monitor the hard drive. Someone might have added 45 terabytes of data overnight, and now your drive is full, right? So you would get all these weird errors. Some small files might add, others might not. You might be able to get files but not add files. So this is a good indication. What are we doing here? It's archive does not exist. RC error. Same thing there. It's another share. We can always see the archive server login. I'm kind of repeating myself over and over, but you can see you maybe see a thread here. The logs are really useful to troubleshoot and find the first point of entry before calling, SolidWorks tech support and say nothing is working. It might be something simple. Check the path. Oh, there's the file. Something else is missing in this folder, the index.xml file. Right? It's just a dumb XML file. Who knows? Someone might have deleted it. Antivirus again. Those are always bad guys. They always remove files when they shouldn't. So, if you have antivirus running on a server, which you probably do, keep an eye on the quarantine log. If you start seeing index files popping up there, it means that antivirus is a little too happy. Thinking that those are just garbage files, or I don't know. But if there is no index file, you can't actually get something. Fix it, back up, or recreate it. Now, recreate it, I'm not going to go over recreating it, but we know the content of an index file, so it's very simple. Open Notepad or copy another index file and just add whatever should be there. The main thing you need in an index file is the version pointer. So if there are 3 physical versions there, and there should be 3 versions of the file in the database, the index file should have 3 little pointers in it. So it's possible to recreate it in this case. It doesn't really happen too often that an index file go missing, but anything has been known to happen, so who knows. Okay, managing archives. Moving on. So this is the most common thing you would do on an archive server from an administrative standpoint. Either yourself or your reseller, or in some cases tech support helps you out. But if you need to move it from one drive to another, this is what you do. Stop the archive server, move the archives, update the registry. That's the 3 things you want to do. The registry is just dumb, and the archive server will just look at those paths. So as long as the registry and the folder matches up, things are fine. Start it again. That's all you need to do. Buy a new drive, move it, update. Period.
Do you have to have all your users log off?
Nope. No, that's why I say stop it. You don't want people to check in and check out stuff while you're moving, because they're going to get weird errors and start screaming. So maybe not do it in the morning or something.
Do you recommend using the built-in way to do that?
The built-in way does exactly this, but without the user interface, or it's just a progress bar, right? So I would almost say it's probably easier to do it like this. You can use your own copy tools or, verification tools or Xcopy or whatever you feel like using, right? So I would recommend doing that like this, rather than use the relocate option.
So this is moving them from one drive to another?
Correct.
On the same archive?
On the same archive server, yes. And I mean, realistically, if you're moving it from one system to another, the EPDM install guide has a section about moving it from one system to another. The archives are basically the same idea. You copy it to the new system, you make sure the new system points to the location on the new system. There is a little backup tool in the archive server configuration that basically dumps out these registry settings. You back them up, you restore them on the new system, and here is probably where things come in, because the restored copy will point to the original location, and if the new server has a different drive, you need to make sure those things are pointing to the right location.
Is it feasible to put in a new system that has the same name and remove the...
Ideally, that would make less headache from you guys, yeah. I mean, if you just have another server and all you're going to do is just replace them, keeping the name, keeping the folder structure, everything, you'll be happy. Your users will be happy and everything. But if you decide to move them around, this is where you would look for issues. That registry and that those folders exist. Same thing here. You have them local, you have bought a new SAN drive or something. I need to move my vault from my local location to my share. Make sure that share has read and write permission for the archive service. Move the files, repoint them, and this time we see that they're using a UNC path in the registry rather than a fixed path. And what else? Compression. Oh yeah. Compression is a good way of reducing some space, right? Everything in each archive is just uncompressed by default. Every version is uncompressed, especially binary stuff like SolidWorks file take up a lot of space. Now, compression is not enabled by default, but it's fairly easy to enable it should you want to. And what happens is that you go in here, this is in the install guide as well, all of this is nice and documented. Anyway, you add a little registry key to the registry, you set up a schedule, and that's in a string form there. You've seen that schedule in other places of EPDM, setting up a replication, cold storage, things like that. It's minute, hour, weekday, I think it is. Minute, hour, weekday. So that's 18 past midnight on a Friday. That's what that means. 18 minutes past 0 o'clock on weekday 5. Anyway, once you have that thing in, at that point, the archive service will start crawling through the archives, and anything that's older than the topmost version will be compressed with GC. So the archive will look like the right hand. But you actually save a bunch of space there. So you can reduce a lot of space. Yes?
So do you set that on one archive server?
Yes, it's individual per archive server.
So if you have 5 archive servers,
You have to do it on each archive server. Go ahead.
Is there any way to have a job that's finished or actually push it through your current file workflow? You really don't need versions 1 through 4? Any way to clear those out?
Yeah, not clear them. We can do something called cold storage. Cold storage. It's that's what cold storage is intended, right? Basically, it's these intermediate versions that you just work on, not revised versions, not versions with revisions, older stuff that's just taking up space or whatever. You can set up a cold storage schema for that schedule. That's something you do in the admin tool. Looks like that. You have 2 options: deleting those versions or moving them. The idea is, of course, you move them off to some cold storage media, a secondary device, another drive, a tape backup, a vault, somewhere far off, because you don't need those versions. You might need them at some point, but you don't need them at the moment. They're just taking up space on your archive. They're not active. So you could use cold storage. Just don't go overboard with cold storage. Don't cold storage. I mean, theoretically, you could set cold storage to keep just one version, meaning the topmost version is the only one kept on the archive server, and everything older gets cold stored. But there's always someone that needs to get that version 1 at some point. So cold storage is one way. Be a little, wary about it, though.
When you get to cold storage, does it stay on that media, or does it move it back into the archive?
What happens is that if you delete them, it's gone. Bye-bye. If you move them, you basically define where should it go. It's a media folder. So it's a folder somewhere where it basically takes those versions and move them to that folder, takes them out from the archive, it updates that index file and says this version is archived, and the database has a table called cold storage where it keeps track of which versions are cold stored, and that's how when you go to the get version menu, you see that they get grouped into a cold storage thing, and the history will show them as cold storage. So they get moved to that media, and the idea then is now and then, IT takes that media and writes it to a Blu-ray or some kind of tape backup and stores it away from the server, cold stored. Should that version be needed, it can be recovered. When you actually get a version that is cold stored, a kind of restore dialog comes up where it points out, okay, that version is cold stored, it's on this media, go call IT and get them to find it for you. So they have to find it and put it back. Now, I've seen also one way of cold storing is you just have another drive where they cold store older versions. I don't really know why, but that's what they do. And in that case, it's always there. So if you do get a cold stored version, you will just get this kind of recover cold storage version, and you just click next and get it back. Of course, it's a permission. It's an administrative permission thing.
Does it put it back in the archive?
Yes.
Location?
Yes. So all cold storage is doing with the move, it takes that physical 000, let's say, what was it here? 00 before, in the left hand there, 001, 2, 3, and 2 and 3. Those 3 versions are cold stored. So it takes those and moves them to the location and updates the index file. And when you restore them, it takes that version and puts it back. So if you restore version 1, you would have 1, 4, 5, 6, and 7 in the archive. Oh, sorry.
Cold storage is a system-wide thing and not?
It's a server-wide thing, yeah. Per server again, just like compression. So if you are space concerned, I would start with compression and then maybe introduce cold storage. Because cold storage is a bit more wonky. It moves stuff out of it or potentially delete stuff, right?
So basically you can do the compression and the cold storage?
Yeah.
How will the file be stored on the cold storage?
It will be stored in, that's a good question. Let me think. Going back to compression, they're compressed in the archive, but when they are retrieved to a client, they get uncompressed on the fly. And I believe when it cold stores it, it uncompresses it as well. But don't hold me on that. I need to double check. Maybe. Or you can double check, you know how to do it.
Two things.
Yes.
If I have an archive
Mm.
with probably tens, if not hundreds of thousands of versions,
Mm-hmm.
and I turn on compression,
Mm-hmm.
how's that going to run
Yeah.
until it's done?
Yep, that's what it is. So don't run it every single minute of every weekday. Do it like once a week or something. Let the server sit there and troll through them. It's pretty fast. It's not taking up any resources really. I have rarely seen compression be an issue, and you know, sure, we by default won't compress anything. That's for performance. You know, you might save a millisecond here or there getting an assembly, but compression is a good way of reducing space. They do have to be uncompressed when you retrieve them, but that also with today's machines, that's almost instant. It really is not that big of a deal, unless you have really weird files.
Okay. And on cold storage, if you have a file with dozens and dozens of versions,
Mm.
and you're running this once a week,
Mm.
and you have it set for 10 versions,
Mm.
then is it going to save the other ones, and then when that runs, it's going to put them in cold storage?
Yeah, it basically the cold storage, you define how many versions you want to keep from the topmost version. So if I say 4 versions, it means I want to keep the 4 most recent versions. So if when the cold storage run, there is 6 versions in the archive, it removes the first and the second. Now, during the week, since the last cold storage ran, you might have created a few more versions, 7, 8, 9, right? So then all of a sudden, version 2 and version 3 also get cold stored, or 3 and 4. So it's only keeping the topmost 4 versions, and that's what it is. Yep.
With the exception of revision.
Yes, and normal, that at the bottom, that never move versions with revisions. That logically you would have it on, because it means that even if a version is older than those 4 most recent versions, if it does have a revision, revision A, it skips it. So
You can only do that by folder,
yes,
not by file type.
no,
Why not?
well, I didn't want to do it by file type. I don't know. It's just, yeah, I hear you. No, it's per folder, and that's the way it is. It would be nice to have by file type, but
Enhancement request?
yeah, of course, there is an SPR about that.
My boss doesn't want to have to check in something and release. He just wants to be able to put his dozen versions of his work on.
That's no good.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, time. Go ahead.
So to reiterate, there's no real performance hit from the client compressed files.
There is, of course, if you run them side by side, the archive server will have to uncompress it and send it to the client. That little uncompress will take a few more seconds. It's tiny, it's nothing that I would worry about, and I haven't had any complaints. So, nope, nothing to worry about. Knowledge-based solution on SolidWorks, I'll get to you here. This one is pretty handy if you don't want to type code or something. There's a handy little report in the report generator. Just drag in the files you want to get the archives for and run it, and bam, it figures it out for you. What was it? Down there was a question?
Yeah, in cold storage, does it take into account if a revision has a reference, or if a child document is referenced by a revision document?
Not really. It's per version. It can become a little weirder when you have approved versions or revised versions not referencing revised children with revision. So be a little wary. Cold storage, stay away from it unless you really need to. There you go. This solution is pretty handy if you're having, for some reason, a lot of archive issues, or if you're administering and want to quickly figure out where is it. There is a cool little add-in that I wrote a long time ago that just brings up the ID for you without having to go to the server or anything. This is more stuff. You've seen this. If you've ever fiddled around with setting up a copy of a vault or anything, there is this magic tool called Archive Server Creator. What this tool is doing is creating those registry entries that we looked at. That's all it's doing. And it's a way of just you have a database, you want to set up a test copy or something, especially before you upgrade or something. So there is a nice knowledge-based solution with a long line of instructions on how to do that.
You back that up one to that other, create one.
Oh yeah, this presentation will be available for download, or if not, just contact me and I'll send it to you. So that's some good stuff. Where are we? Darn, we're out. Aren't we out of time, or are we not? How long is? 6. Look at that. That's awesome. I don't have to stress. Well, let's take a break. No. Another pretty cool tool is, this is more if you're a customer or an admin, you might work with your reseller and they might be using these tools, but it's good to know about them, right? So the archive tool is good when you want to set up a duplicate copy or mirror your vault or something onto another machine for testing or for upgrade or whatever. This tool is pretty good when you have an archive, it's causing some problems. It's not just the archive file, but it's one of its references. So what this tool can do is you can go in there and say, get me the files that are related to this archive. And if there are children or parents, drawings or children, it will pick out just those archives. And you can then send it to tech support, or if you have a huge archive, you might not want to, your archive is your actual vault archive is huge. You just want to test a couple of projects in an upgraded sandbox environment. This is another good tool because you can actually pick a couple of folders and get the archives belonging to those folders. And it's smart enough, because I wrote it, to also include related files in other folders and stuff. So it's a handy tool to know, copy individual archive folders. Yeah, I like it. Hey, replication. Okay, the thing is, replication is essentially copying archives between 2 or more machines, right? So what is replication? Well, that's what it does. It allows you to take archive folders from server A and copy them to server B so that they are available on both servers. It replicates the archives, the stuff we've been looking at. The database has some pointers to which server has each file, so it knows where it is. There's 2 types of replication. And the most common one is the on-demand replication. It means once a file is replicated, it's available, provided you have permissions and stuff to get that physical file. So once it's copied, it's there. Or on-demand means, I need that version, I'm going to replicate it for you. Scheduled means replicate a bunch of files for me. That's what it means. So you set up normally a nightly schedule or a bi-hourly schedule or something, depending on the amount of data that needs to be shuffled between the 2 servers. Now, of course, replication means it has to physically copy files from server A to server B, and that's going to use up some bandwidth and stuff. So, scheduled replication should ideally be done without it. And here is the advanced metric for this. This is without replication. You have one SQL server and one archive server and a bunch of clients that talk to those 2. The files are retrieved from the archive server. With replication, that's the only difference. You now have a second archive server where the files are transferred to those clients. The clients that are, we call them attached to that second server. Yes, I would say that. That's actually an off-storage backup. The files are physically, they're copies. That's what it is. So those 1, 2, 3 in that archive folder we looked at of that document, those 3 versions will now be available, copied to the other server, provided we replicate everything. Yeah, so it's a nice point of backup. So off-site backup, essentially. Yes?
I've had a case where we had servers like this set up to replicate between one another, and the view that's set up on the client is only pointing to one of the archive servers. So when they attempt to do a get latest or check out a file, it could be one assembly that has a part that doesn't exist on the archive
Correct.
server they're pulling from.
Yep.
And they get errored out.
Well, they shouldn't get error out because then the on-demand replication should kick in, right? So there must be a reason that that one part file is not being transferred over to your local server, right? So that's why we call it on-demand. It's always available and triggering a replication. There's something that's stopping that file. And now we know we're going to look at a few more locations how to troubleshoot replication errors. But essentially, it's the same as the archive errors we've looked at. Find which file it is, figure out why it can't be copied from that folder. You know, in replication, it's usually something blocking the communication. You know, we have the WAN or the VPN or the intranet or whatever those two servers are talking over. There's always something in between there that potentially can prevent files from being copied. But in your case, there's no reason that single part shouldn't be replicated. It takes a little longer because it has to actually get it from the remote server, but there must be a reason that that file couldn't replicate from that remote server.
The way I fixed it, I'll just call it fixed because the user was happy. But I logged on to the archive server and I attempt to do a get latest of that same file.
And it fixed it.
No. So then I go and I go to the history and I roll it back.
Well, that's an easy way. Delete the bad version and then, you fix it. So that's a way of doing it. There's a lot of way of fixing things, and that's a valid way of doing it. You didn't fix the underlying problem, but you ignored it or avoided it.
Well, it's not affecting the file.
No, exactly, because you still have the other versions, and that's the handy part of EPDM, right? You still have the older versions. End of the world, you still could go back to the previous version. Might have to do a little work, but it's there, provided you actually added the file to the vault in the first place. Setting up, I'm not going to go into the ports and stuff. James had a good session about what ports need to be open. But essentially, replication, what do? Well, when you add a new replicated vault, it means that we're basically taking the archives and making them available on a second or third server. One thing in replication in EPDM world is we expect those servers to be able to communicate with one another. So the lower left one should be able to talk to the lower right one and the upper left one. Archives are involved when replicating. So here is a screenshot of two servers, basically the folder structure, the archive location of those two things. So the first thing that happens when setting up a new thing is it creates this folder structure, the 0 to F folders, based on the location you defined when you installed the archive server on that second machine, right? So in that case, it's probably on a C drive, and on my first drive, it's on a D drive. It doesn't really matter. The key here is that when you actually prepare replication or set up replication, no files are actually replicated. It's only preparing for replication. It adds some good stuff to the registry on that second server. So it knows which the interesting part would be the server, which would be the SQL server, the SQL database server hosting that vault. DB name, that's the database name. And you can also see if a vault should be replicated or not by looking at its replicate flag. That's an important flag, and especially if you start moving or changing servers and stuff, you might forget that darn flag or, didn't follow the instructions. That could cause problems. So a vault should have that flag in the registry. Then it adds an entry to the database, and there's a cool table in the database called archive servers. Every server gets a unique ID. And that's how EPDM knows where a file is. It's linking each file to a particular server. So the first server is always ID 1. That's the one you created the vault on. The first replicated server will be ID 2. The third one will be 3. If you delete a replicated server and add a fourth one, it will just take the next number. So there may be gaps. Not necessarily, the second server might not always be 2. It could be 4 or 5 or whatever.
How do you delete a replicated server?
You right-click. What you do is, be careful, back up things before, right? But you go into the admin tool, and you expand the vault under the server you want to unreplicate or get rid of it. You right-click the vault and select remove. Okay? Be careful about the warning that comes up. The warning should say, okay, you're removing a replicated server. Files will be removed from this server, but remain on all the other servers. If you say, are you sure you want to delete this vault and everything with it? That's bad. Okay, that shouldn't happen. But it has happened. So read the warning. Yeah. So basically what it does is it removes those registry entries. It removes that entry from the database. It removes the physical files.
You're saying to go onto that server that you're going to, and if the server has already been decommissioned by...
Then we have to go the back door. Then we have instructions how to manually do this. But anytime you do something manually, there is the risk of introducing weird stuff, you know. Someone gets a little too delete happy and start deleting records that shouldn't be deleted, and all of a sudden no one can do anything in the vault, right? So read instructions, be very careful, try to remove a replicated server by using the automated way, i.e. right-click it and select remove. Read the warnings, you know. If you back up before, you're pretty okay. But I can't tell you how many times they call after they've done this and say, where is my vault? Well, yeah, exactly. Call before. Yeah, that's a good tip. Okay, there's another table that's very important in replication. And again, I'm pointing out these geeky tables because this is going to help you pinpoint or understand what happens behind the scenes. Archive servers table contains the name of each server and gives them an ID. Archive server stored is the table that knows where each physical version is. So when a replication is set up, it basically adds the record to that archive servers table. It also adds entries to the archive server stored table that points to the first archive server, the source server, the server that has the files. Right? The new server doesn't have any files at this point. Only the first one has. So when you bring up that pie chart and thing that shows you where files are, they're going to be all on the first server or whatever source server you selected. The new server will have no files at this point. And there we are. Now the vault is actually replicated, prepared for replication. It hasn't actually replicated any files yet. Ta-da. This archive server store table, it's the only way EPDM database knows where each file is. There's 4 columns. The first one, archive server ID, that's which server the file is on. Yep.
If I wanted to kick off a new replicated server
Yep.
and wanted to minimize the impact to the network traffic,
Mm-hmm.
is it possible to manually take
Mm-hmm.
the archive file structure and place it on the replicated server?
Yes, but the problem is if you just copy the files and forget about the database, because as we're going to see here, the database if the database needs to know that these files now exist on the second server, you've just copied them with Windows Copy or something or a USB copy, the database is still unsynced. It has no idea that you did the manual copy. So you need to actually tell the database, I copied these files. We have a method for doing that. We call it initial replication. Basically, you have a server, you plan on replicating everything from server A to server B and then ship it off to China or something, right? You don't want to spend 40 weeks replicating all that file, so you're copying them. But we have a script. You have to actually go through a routine. So we have some steps. There is a knowledge-based solution. Your reseller can find it for you or help you with it. But be careful, just copying the physical archives won't do anything to the database. And we're going to see that in 2 seconds here, I think. So the archive ID is where that file is. Archive type is the type. You're going to see 4 different types. Most of them are going to have a 1. Some will have 2, that's images in data cards. Add-ins, if there are, dispatch, task, or some custom add-in, that's going to be 3. And there is this user information file. I'm going to touch upon it a little bit. The 4th column is the archive ID. That's the document ID. Same thing, just different name. Version UID, that's the version UID. So it's just going to be a running number of things. So it's not actually going to be it's not version 163 of that second file. It could be version 1, because the version UID is a unique identifier per version. So there is a revisions table. If you want to geek out and figure out which one is which, the revisions table will tell you which one is which. Okay, first file to replicate. So we set up the server. Nothing has actually been replicated. The first thing that will happen when you expand that new server or log into that server or create a view to that server is that the login information, I told you the archive server keeps track of some authentication part. That stuff needs to be transferred to the new server. And we do that by replicating a little users.dat file. It's essentially a binary dump of the archive server registry settings. You can't really read it in Notepad or anything. It's all binary. It's always in that 0 folder. So the users.dat file gets put into the 0 folder on the source server. And when someone logs in on server 2 or you go into the admin tool of server 2, it basically replicates that file from 1 to 2, reads in the admin password and things like that into the registry. So now the new server has the same settings as the old server, or the source server, not old server. Now, of course, if this is failing, and here, someone changes the password on one server, the admin password, right? That password needs to transmit itself to the other servers. So the user's.dat file gets a new version, 002, and the database gets a record that the latest version UID 2 of that login information, only exists on server 1. Right? And if it fails to replicate this file, replication will fail as well. So something is wrong with the communication, likely some port being blocked or something not properly configured. Okay, what happens when we add a file in a replicated environment? We looked at adding a file in a normal, non-replicated single vault setup, and when we saw it added a document ID, it added an archive ID. It does a few more things when we deal with the replication. So let's say we add a file on a client that's attached to the first server, that TI-2. So version 1 is created. It creates version 1 in documents table. This is the document ID. I've already figured out which archive ID it is. On the first server, the server that the client is attached to, it creates this archive folder and the physical content, the index file version 1. So it's only on the first server, the one that the client is working against. And then it adds one row with a pointer to the first server, the server that the client is attached to. So that file is now on the first server. If it's replicated, it would have an entry for server 2. But at this point, you've only added it to the first server. It hasn't actually replicated to the second server. So the second server won't have an archive folder, no index file, no nothing. And it won't have a record in archive server stored. Ta-da! That's all it does. So getting a file, that's when we're actually replicating, and that's when we're doing the on-demand replication, unless that file has been scheduled overnight or something. But let's say it's that file, you just added it on server 1, the client on server 2 decides, I need that version, or another file here. I need the latest version of this file. You can see in the client side that it's only replicated to the first server, TI-2. So you do get latest. The client will check with the archive server it's attached to, and the archive server says, I don't have that file. Where is it? Well, it's on server 1. So that file that we added earlier only has a record that points to first server. Aha, I need to replicate it. I need to copy it from the first server. And that's what we call on demand. I need it now. So it basically copies the file. Bam, bam. It creates the archive folder, the index folder, fills in the version 1 information. And then, when that is successful, it adds another row that says, this file is now on server 2 as well. So that's one version of a file that's fully replicated. It will have 2 rows. If there was 4 servers, there should be 4 rows for one version. If the file has 5 versions, and all those versions are replicated between 5 servers, you would have 5 times 5. You would have a bunch of records in archive server stored, essentially. So this is why if you just copy the files without actually updating the database, it won't know that the files were copied to server 2. It will just say file already exists when it tries to write to it. So we need to make sure the archives and the database are in sync. And once the on-demand is done, it has replicated it to the server I'm attached to, it gets it to the client and shows that, it's now replicated to all servers, that version. Scheduled replication, it's just a way of pushing or pulling more files than a single file, right? So you set up a replication. Once replication is set up, you probably set up a scheduled replication for your projects, for your whole vault, whatever. You know, of course, the more files you include, the longer it's going to take to replicate. And then every night, usually it's a nightly thing. Each archive server figures out what schema they have and starts a replication. Gets a list of versions it doesn't have and starts getting them. Servers are always getting files. Files are never pushed. They're always pulled. So think of each replicated server as a client that gets file from another server.
The time when it's set to replicate, which server is it referencing?
It's always this target server. We call them source and target. So it's always the server that pulls the files. So it's a local time to that server. There was another question. Yep.
Is there a way to push a file?
No. See, I like that.
Not even a workaround?
No, I mean, on demand is pushing a file, right? I mean, I want to get version 2, so you can. I mean, it's semantics, right? It's pushed from the other server or pulled to this, or I don't know. I call it pull, not push. It's always the server that requests this, and that's what's important to know. It's always the target server that requests the file from the other servers. They're never kind of distributed the other way. But, it's the same thing, essentially. Right? Yes?
Whenever you do the test,
Yep.
the connection test,
Yep.
the description somewhere of what's happening, what server is sending information.
It kind of tries to do an on-demand replication without actually doing it to emulate. So it's using the same protocols and same methods as it would for a normal file. And
So whenever you're doing a replication, you probably need to have bidirectional communication between.
yes, that's because a file could exist on first server or second second server and not first server. So that's the whole thing. It's bidirectional, ideally. Exactly. We're going to look at where the client is. I mean, time is running out, but we'll look at it anyway. Yes?
Is there a log file how you completed or didn't complete?
Yeah, well, logs are logging problems. So if there is problems, if there are errors in the log, something went wrong. If there are no errors, if you just have that entry and nothing below it, things went fine. We only log when there's an error. There isn't an actual, these files were replicated. Now, that information is in the database. We can make a report, and wow, look at that. 5 minutes. Attached server, okay? So when you set up a client, one client talks to one server. And in a replicated environment, you likely want your clients to talk to the local server, the server in your own server room rather than the server over somewhere else. That server is defined when you set up this cache folder, the local file vault view, right? So whoever is creating the view selects a server, and that server is then stored in a registry entry. If you, for some reason, want to figure out which server is my client attached to, go and check this registry key. That's going to tell. And it says server LOC, location, I guess, or something. But it basically means this is the server the client will get files from, write files to. And that's where the file should, basically becomes replicated. If a server is acting up or whatever, I don't know, you desperately need a file, you can route the client to one of the other servers by updating that registry key. If you do that, restart the client or kill and restart Explorer process, just so that it reestablishes the connection to the other server. That's another way, yeah, exactly. You might have a machine that's sometimes here and sometimes there. That registry key points to where it is. Yep.
Is it local policy that has?
Correct. There is a policy called the archive server selector, but it kind of works now and then. It's not always reliable. It all depends on how broadcast is working in your network and stuff. So often you only see your local server, not the other one, and that's useless. So it's good to know that there is a registry key, so you can just go in and override it if needed. We're almost done. Look at that. Some errors from a replication, very similar. This is the most classic error in replication. All attempts to download a file from a server failed. It basically means I'm having trouble replicating a file on demand. Start with the client log. Which archive ID is it? Now, since we're dealing with a replicated environment, make sure you go and check the server that you're attached to, right? So if there's 4 servers and a client on server 2 has problem, make sure you go and check the log on server 2. And that's why, if you're not sure, check the registry. Logically, it should be the local server, but it could be any server. Okay, the log will usually tell you, I can't replicate this file, could not replicate, and what does it do? It tells you, failed to replicate, source server. It's having trouble talking to that other server, figure out what's wrong. Let's see. Oh, my numbers are off. Okay, that should have said 4 anyway. Okay, so you know which server your local server is trying to talk to. That's the source server. So then you go and check the log on the source server. Is there a problem getting that particular file for some reason? And now we're down to the archive troubleshooting that we learned earlier. So now we can figure out, okay, that's the path. It gets version 1. Why can't it get version 1? Index file is missing, or in this case, version 1 doesn't physically exist for some reason. It should be there, but it's not there. And you have to figure out what's causing the files to disappear. Rarely they do that, but antivirus, bad drives, whatever. Someone copied stuff without actually doing it right. Same thing here. You're trying to check out the file or get it. Get and check out, both of them are going to retrieve a file in order to open it and work with it. Same thing here. I'm going to skip the client log. Always start with the client log. Then go to the archive server, the one you're attached to. Try to figure out, again, you see which source server the error is from. Go to the source server log and see why it's having trouble getting the file. The index file was missing. So it's the same type of error, but with an additional server. So follow the error through the logs. Same thing there. This you will rarely see, but you might get something that says hostname can't be found. That's an indication that these servers can't really talk to one another as they should. So it's looking for a server 2. There isn't a server 2. And that's it. There isn't a server 2, so it's having trouble figuring out. So something has gone wrong. That server has changed its IP or gotten taken offline or something like that. Checking out shows archive server not started. Now that might not mean that the server you attached to has not started. It could be that the server that has the file is not started. So again, go check the local log, figure out which one it is, go and check your attached server, and you can see that it failed to replicate from server. So now you know which server is trying to get it from, could not connect to. So in this case, that remote server is not responding or started in this case. Yay. Go ahead.
What will the SQL login putting that replication? I've actually seen where it kind of like half works, but maybe the replication schema won't start off.
Yeah, of course, the archive server service will act as a client, so to speak. So it needs to go and check things with the database. It needs to get the replication schemas and stuff. So yeah, it needs to establish a connection to the SQL. It needs to log in with something, and if it fails to do that, you're going to get weird errors in the archive server log. The replication will never start. It won't get certain files. So yeah, it needs to be able to communicate with the server. No, it shouldn't be. It should always be hit. Right?
So possibly we could get the PowerPoint?
If you're nice.
I mean, that would be a great tool to have log in.
I think so. I crammed a bunch of stuff into it. Of course, there's tons of stuff to take in, but the idea is that you at least won't be too afraid of the archives, know where to look if something is really going wrong. It would help, when you're working with your reseller to point them in the right direction. Your reseller can point you in the direction, and I can get the information that's useful.
Running around using VMs as your archive?
VMs, I kind of say, here's my thing about VMs. Use them for archive server, fine, because it's just a dumb service that's running it. But then again, why have a virtual machine that's just running a little service? Because your virtual machine, you have to run an operating system within it that runs the service. So if you're going to use VM, yeah, for the archive server at the most, and you probably will store the physical archives on a share or some other device anyway, so you're just adding a bunch of layers to it. SQL server on VM, I don't like it. It's rarely a good thing because you have to add all these layers. VMs are nice, but they're nice in a way that SQL server does not like it. It's basically, you're adding so many layers and so many potential bottlenecks when you're dealing with VMs. Great for testing, great for troubleshooting, great for just getting a server up and running quickly, but yeah. Avoid VMs if you could. Archive server, fine, run it on a VM. SQL, don't.
If I were to kick off a compression scheme
Mm-hmm.
and it ran in, if it was a large enough archive and it ran into business hours, would that impact the user experience?
I don't think we've had a single service request, support request about the compression taking time or interfering. It's usually the compression doesn't start. Why is that? Or, yeah, that's basically it. There was a long time ago we had an issue with compressed files and only partially replicated archives where it wouldn't compress those archives. It had to have all the files replicated, but if you only had 1 and 4 replicated, it skipped compressing that thing. I wouldn't say, I don't think it's a big deal, but, try not to run it every day. I mean, it's almost overkill. Run it on a Friday or something, or off hours, once a week. I don't think it's going to have much effect. Don't run it every minute, every day. Yes?
In the Dallas and Boston scenario where you got your sites,
Uh-huh.
checking out a file in Dallas,
Uh-huh.
getting to Boston, setting your registry,
Yep.
both the regular and the WOW 6432. You check
See,
and it doesn't, it won't pull it across.
but actually, when you check out, yeah, that could be because you updated the registry without restarting the client. It thinks it's in the wrong thing. Oh, okay. No, but here's the thing. When you're checking out something, you're not actually doing anything on the server yet. It's when you write it to the server, it creates that new version, you know.
That's exactly what I was expecting, but every once in a while we actually get that once you check it in, it says archive server stored record says it's stored in Dallas.
Well, that's wrong. So we need to figure out why that is happening then, because it shouldn't happen. That's why I told you, if you're going to flip the server while you were connected to server 1, you update it, and you start working with the file, it's possible that it still thinks that it's using that ID. But that's why if you restart the client, it will read the proper registry thing.
In this case, it's been turned off.
Well, that's no good.
And it actually checks it in. That's the funny part. It's just the database is updated.
So there's some mismatch somewhere going on. We need to investigate that. There could be some registry key that still have some old information. Yeah. Well, let's figure it out. You have a support ticket open or anything? Okay. Okay. So yeah, we'll look into it, or bug me if not.
So when an entry is missing in the XML file, how do you correct it?
You open it in Notepad and add that entry.
It's okay to add?
Yeah.
One area you didn't mention was the database. I get an error every once in a while that says that database is under heavy use. I know for a fact that it's not under heavy use.
That sounds like it's having some kind of table lock or a share problem. So the SQL server is some sort of deadlock. We need to figure out why that deadlock is happening in the database. Huh. Yeah.
I look at the server and I'm like, there's absolutely
No. I mean, I can imagine if it somehow holds a table lock, so other, on the documents table or archive service store table, so other clients that's trying to retrieve, or other operations that tries to get the same information is not able to read that data. But well, you need to troubleshoot it. Try to find a pattern. That's really the best thing. Well, there's always a pattern. It's just very hard to find it. There shouldn't be anything, but let's discuss it. Let's keep on. If this is something that keeps happening, we need to figure out why.
Did you put your email address on the door?
Oh, didn't I? I'm secret that way. It's very simple. All I'm gonna do it here. That's me. Actually, this is not my email. It's either tor.everoot. Hang on, I'm gonna fix it.
You need to highlight more.
Look at me. I hate PowerPoint. There. And then an @ sign. Where's the @ sign? At solidworks.com, 3ds.com. We'll do the simple one. Like that. So torivrot at 3ds.com. Oh, you want it right now? Sure. You don't trust me. You don't trust me at all.
This one presentation makes the whole thing worth twice as much.
Oh yeah.
Greatly presented, a lot of really relevant and immediately useful information.
Well, that's good.
My bar is going to wonder where the hell I went.
Well, look at you. Sharp. Yeah, it's a lot of technical stuff, but why be afraid of archives? That's usually the thing. People are like, they're strange, they're scary. They're not that scary. But be a little careful. If you start mucking around in the database or on the archives, you could screw up things. But
this gives you all kinds of room to play in the sandbox and figure out, once you get proficient at it.
Exactly. Where did I put it?
You're going to be posting it up on the website, aren't
It should be somewhere after this thing is over, but you can just send me an email and I'll send it to you as well. Or give me a USB drive and I'll figure out where to send it. Where is it?
Yeah, I just wanted to shake your hand because you saved our bacon.
Oh, yeah. Ah, no problem.
Problem with the file version upgrade.
Oh, yeah.
And you came up with the scripts to fix all
Well,
the...
I'm glad it helped. That's good. That's what I want to hear. I never hear any good stories. I always hear the bad stories. You know, something is not working. Where is that USB drive? Am I plugging it into the right thing? Do I have to do something magic here with it?
Not that I'm aware of. It's not mine, so.
You should just have to plug it in. Plug it right into the USB.
Well, that would make sense, wouldn't it? Let's see, now something is moving. There. I guess I didn't push hard enough.
How are you?
Good?
Good. I'm going to talk to you tomorrow.
Uh-oh. I'm good tonight then.
I'm going to be in your sequel.
Oh yeah, that's fun.
So,
don't get your hopes up there
I've got one
now.
site.
This is low level, that's high level, so come on.
I've got a site that they seem to have network issues, and I want to talk to you about it because I'm not getting a lot of help out of IS, and I want to see if you can give me some ideas on some things I can.
We can always talk.
Okay?
Yeah.
Do you have a session on shells?
On what?
On the shell? Like enterprise crashing on the shell?
No, we don't have a...
Windows.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Uninstall what, WinZip extension or something.
In tour, I wanted to introduce myself. Rob Thiemann from R.A. Jones.
Oh, hi there.
You've helped us out with Julian a lot.
Oh, good deal.
So I wanted to introduce myself.
Why am I standing up? Can I do this? I'm going to copy the thing for you, and then I'm going to walk down so I don't have to look like the king over here. Although it's pretty nice, though. It's like... Well, yeah. Well, it's already at my head. Let's see. Well, I'm glad it went. You liked it. There we go. That should be it. Otherwise, just email me and we'll get it sorted out. Oh, you want it too. Look at that. Yes.
Main and second.
Uh-huh.
On second server, some files unique. I delete second server.
It has a check that there are no unique files on the second server before you. So you're not allowed to remove a server if there are files that haven't yet been replicated.
Customers buy files.
Yeah. But if are you wanting to delete it and it warns you that there are unique files? So we have to... So are there unique files? Do you know if there are any files that are only on that server, not replicated back to the first server?
The problem is create scheduler.
Nothing happens. Okay. Okay. So there's something. So we need to figure out what's wrong. Are you? Let's just email me or something, and we'll look into it. You and I. Oh, you solved it right now. Okay, well then I'm not needed. No, but it should. Of course, if the schedule is not starting, then there will be unique files. But when you remove a server, the first thing it does is it makes sure there are no versions that only exist on that server. And if so, it says you can't remove it. If you are certain there are no versions on that server, you can manually remove it. We have instructions to manually get rid of it, but that potentially means you're going to lose some versions.
Which one? Symmetry. Yeah. Minneapolis area. It's either one or the other. Yeah, it's the other, right? Yeah, it came from a customer too. Well, not necessarily the bar.
You guys replicating in the sites?
A scheduled replication started more directly, or? Yeah, what you would do is what I would do is I would just temporarily change the schema to, start in 2 minutes or something instead of waiting till midnight. No, there are some bugs in earlier service packs of 2012. So again, give me, mail me or something, and I can, give you some ideas of. There was an issue where scheduled replication will look like it's starting, but it won't actually process any files, and that can happen if there is a version that's shared, that is basically shared between 2 folders or something, and when the server gets a list of files to replicate, it gets the same file twice and gets confused and won't process anything. And that's actually a known bug. We fixed it in 2012 SP5. We have hot fixes for earlier version. It sounds like you're hitting that one, actually. And that can happen. And the symptom is, you look at the log, it says starting to replicate 4,000 files or whatever, and then next day it says the same thing, or nothing is going down. It's not actually replicating the files. And that means that it's probably one of that bug that we're hitting. That could be. No, that sounds more likely that it hasn't actually read the updated replication schedule. So we need to see if it's formatted incorrectly or whatever, because it should. That's the first thing it should. You should at least see a starting point, especially with this symptom. So again, we have to figure out what's wrong. Why isn't it reading the proper schema? Is there some mismatch somewhere? Okay, there we go. File. Was that yours?
I was going to say it's.
Oh, Jeff. Oh,
Jeff.
Hi.
Yeah. How you doing? Figured I'd finally catch up.
Oh, look at that. Nice. I like it. Well, you can have my fancy. Yeah.
7 years ago or so.
Oh, yeah. Time flies, doesn't it?
So, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Did you sit in on this thing, or?
Same thing here. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
We work together a lot.
Oh, Larry, hi. Good to see you. Yeah, I think we've basically just chatted on email and phone, but never.
We worked a few technical problems over when I was working at Symmetry. Now I'm at Stratasys.
Oh, okay.
Now I'm on the customer side.
There you go. Join the dark side, as we say. Well, Joy Garon joined the dark side as well. The training. Yeah, she. Well, I don't remember the company, but yeah, she's a customer now.
I'll be darned.
Yeah, so no more good information from her.
And Bastion is gone too.
Yeah, I don't know what happened there. He decided to try something else for a bit.
He really went to the dark side.
Yeah, but not at first. Not at first. There was a LinkedIn update that just showed whoop. Yeah.
All right. Good to meet you, Tori. Thanks.
Yes. Okay, 2 seconds. Let me do this because I'm gonna. I don't know. Taking time. I'm just gonna look like I'm doing something here. What am I doing with that? Of course.
Some theoretical questions I want to
Theoretical.
run off you back and forth.
Thank you.
And I'd like to thank you for the help that you did with us.
Oh, no problem. Oh, yeah, okay. That's good. No, we can have a chat tomorrow or something.
Art Chains, CAD Dimensions.
Oh, yeah?
Kevin Holbrook.
Oh, okay.
Quick question.
Mm-hmm.
Index content. What do you think about using it or not using it?
Use it, but it's not the fix to all fixes, right? I mean, it relies on Microsoft Indexing Service, which crawls through the documents. It's handy, you get full content search, right?
Yes, and what we use it for is like AutoCAD legacy documents. Got text in there, be able to find the documents.
Yeah, it should be able to index DWG files and stuff.
It'll run for a while, then the service says it keeps running. But if you go and look at the catalog, it shows nothing. It doesn't show that files to still be indexed, what the word list count is or anything like that.
There must be some bug in Microsoft Indexes. From an EPDM standpoint, all we do is create that catalog and tell it to start, right? And the rest is up to that indexing service. And there isn't too much troubleshooting on the index server side. I know that historically they've had some issues. Microsoft themselves had some issues on certain server combinations. It may be that you're hitting it. The symptom of one customer was back in Sweden, but basically it started and it looked like it was running for a while and then it just stopped. Very similar to your thing. And they ended up opening a case with Microsoft because, you know, everything looked okay, but we couldn't really figure out. But they finally found, there was a bug in Microsoft, some kind of registry key that was wrong or something. So
George Ma has a case open. That's
okay. Yeah, so we need to try to find a pattern. Maybe it's see if there are other issues. I mean, SharePoint uses, there are a lot of other applications out there that relies on Microsoft indexing service, so there's usually some person that has run into it. Maybe not an EPDM one, but someone. Yeah, Google is great.
That's
yeah.
where I saw
so,
just had a hotfix.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember that there was some kind of, Microsoft is a little, you know, sometimes it's tricky to find their hotfixes, unless it's a general thing, but you have to request a certain KB article and get it emailed to you and blah, 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 but there was something involved with indexing. I don't remember it now, it was a while back, but it's very likely that that might be what's happening, so.
Yeah, there's something about a 32-bit indexing around 64-bit server and stuff.
Yeah, that one is nasty, I remember that one too, so that was it had trouble doing something. But yeah, let's Google it and see if we can figure it out.
Yeah, I appreciate it. You got a sequel thing tomorrow?
Yeah, everyone is hoping that it's not as fun as this one. This is more. That's more like, you know.
That was one of my questions as well, because I just heard someone say, "Are you giving a class tomorrow?"
I have a session tomorrow about SQL Server performance.
Microphone. There's like 3 of us.
Oh well. Da-na-na.